And it all culminated with Notre Dame students surrounding the South Bend Klan headquarters and basically taking out every window in the building. They had a quote unquote fiery cross with light bulbs in the second floor window, and the first floor was a grocery. So the students were just taking potatoes out of barrels and whipping them up there until they put out every light.
You heard that there. That is Todd Tucker, author of the book Notre Dame versus the Klan: How the Fighting Irish Defeated the Ku Klux Klan, talking about the wild scene that occurred 100 years ago right in downtown South Bend, Indiana. More of that later, but first, thank you for listening to another episode of Round the Bend Now and Then. My name is Matt Emery, and I'm a local history nerd. My main mission in this podcast, as well as other Round the Bend material, is to create engaging content that shares how intertwined the South Bend and Mishawaka area's past is to our present. In the podcast, I interview local leaders, business owners, and community members to help tell their stories, because their stories help tell the story of South Bend and Mishawaka. In this episode, I meet with author Todd Tucker, and we discuss the story behind his amazing book, Notre Dame versus the Klan: How the Fighting Irish Defeated the Ku Klux Klan. I discovered Todd's book about 5 years ago and was shocked that I had never heard the story about this wild clash between University of Notre Dame students and members of the Ku Klux Klan. And it all went down right here in downtown South Bend in 1924. In the book, Todd does an absolute wonderful job of not only telling the story of the actual riot, but also providing readers with great historical context detailing the history behind the University of Notre Dame, as well as the Ku Klux Klan, and how their separate but unique histories led up to this 1924 clash in downtown South Bend, right on the corner of Michigan and Wayne Street. Obviously, I am vehemently against everything the Ku Klux Klan stood for then and stands for today. But this is a part of our country, state, and even our city's history. It's important to understand even the dark aspects of our past to help us make better informed decisions today and in the future. As I always say when I meet with authors of books, we can only scratch the surface in a 45-minute interview, so I highly encourage folks to purchase and read Notre Dame versus the Klan. It includes deep background on some important figures in Notre Dame's history, as well as infamous characters in the Klan's past. I included links in the show notes to purchase this book and the multiple other ones that Todd has written over the years. Thank you, Todd, for taking the time to meet with this crazy guy here. And again, I truly appreciate it. Before we jump into the interview, I just want to take a moment to make sure that you guys visit our sponsors of this episode, In Rug Co. Studio and Gift Shop and Alley's Cafe and Catering. You still have a little bit of time left for some last-minute Christmas shopping, so head to In Rug Co. at 220 East Mishawaka Avenue in Mishawaka, right across from Central Park. Then, when you're tired of all the shopping, head to Alley's and slam on some food and enjoy the family atmosphere that has been there for over 2 decades. Do me a favor, when you're at Alley's or in Rudco, tell them you heard about them on this podcast. Also, take a picture when you're there, tag me in it on Facebook or Twitter, or simply message me and let me know you stopped by. I'd love to share some of these pics and continue to share the good word about these truly locally owned gems. And now, here is my interview with Todd Tucker. Well, hey, Todd, first, thank you so much for coming on. I truly appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I read your book, Notre Dame versus the Klan: How the Fighting Irish Defied the KKK. I read it, 6 or 7 years ago, maybe. So I reread it recently once we scheduled this, and it just, when I reread it, it just have a different kind of angle when I'm reading it, because I knew I was going to meet with you, right? But before we dive into it, just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, high school, college, all that good stuff.
Lifelong Indiana resident. I grew up in New Albany, Indiana, the southern end of the state. I went to Notre Dame on a Navy ROTC scholarship.
Nice.
So I graduated, and I ended up doing 5 years active duty in the Navy, which is pretty much the only phase of my life where I didn't live in Indiana.
Okay.
After the Navy, I moved back to Valparaiso,
Uh-huh.
and that's where I am now.
So after Notre Dame, you went to the Navy.
Yeah, I had a 4-year obligation because of the scholarship, and then I did 5. Ended up doing 5.
I got you.
Mm-hmm.
And you were at Notre Dame in 1988?
I was there. Yeah, I was there 86 to 90. I was class of 90. So my freshman year was Lou Holtz's first year. My first game in the stadium was Lou Holtz's first game. Then 1917 loss to Michigan.
Yes.
The quarterback for Michigan was at that
It was
game?
Harbaugh.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And then sophomore year, Tim Brown, who lived in Cavanaugh Hall with me, won the Heisman. He lived in my dorm. And then my junior year, we won it all.
My goodness. And at the end of your book, you talked about the impact that Notre Dame football kind of has more nationwide, and just not on the students.
Right.
And even here in South Bend that season, I mean, I'm getting chills just thinking about first Tim Brown. I was only 9. Mm-hmm. And then the 88, I was 10. And we would, at my house, my dad, my uncles and stuff would watch every game, and they went undefeated that year, and we would play Another One Bites the Dust, doom, 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 after every game. And I just have such fond memories of just our whole crew dancing and bouncing around. It's just
great.
Magical.
It was great. It was good timing. I went to that Fiesta Bowl. We drove down there. I took a Greyhound from Louisville to St. Louis. Met a friend there, and then we drove the rest of the way to Arizona.
You wrote about that a little bit.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that story's in there. The Newt Rockne the Newt Rockne rest stop, right? That's in there.
And with Tim Brown, matter of fact, and I was in 4th grade, and we took a field trip to St. Mary's College, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't remember much about 4th grade. It was years ago. However, we were in one of the athletic facilities in St. Mary's, like an auditorium-ish situation. And there was a line of kids all of a sudden clamoring to get to somebody. And we were only 9 at the time. It was Tim Brown. And he lined all of us kids up. This was impromptu. It had to have been 60, 70 of us, and signed autographs for every single one of us. He was such a nice guy.
I mean, he lived in Cavanaugh, and he after he won the Heisman, he put 2 big brown paper grocery bags outside his door. One was in and one was out. And if you wanted him to sign something, you just put it in the in the end bag, and then you go back, and when he got a chance, he'd sign it. So I've got that, the Sports Illustrated that he was on the cover of.
Yes.
I've got that signed by him.
Oh, that's neat.
He was just the nicest guy.
That's neat. I mean, that autograph is right there. To Matt, best wishes, Tim Brown, number 81.
Yeah, and those were fun years. Really were.
It's neat.
And then my senior year, we went to the Orange Bowl. I went to that too. So it was a good stretch.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I remember that too in 89. That was the
Colorado.
Yep. Did you spend any time at the old 5 Point intersection at all, or? Yeah.
I mean, they're all the only bar that's left is the linebacker, which the linebacker cannot be killed. But,
no.
I always like the Commons, if you remember that one.
I was too young.
That was my favorite. Uh-huh. And then Coaches was like the new nice bar. And I think Coaches went away, and then it came back, and I think it's gone away again.
It's a drive and shine now. Literally, it's a drive and shine.
So, and then Club 23, Bridget McGuire's.
Yes.
They're all gone, right?
All of them. Yeah. Have you been to, that's just completely different now.
They just leveled it, right?
Leveled it all. They redid Eddie. They redid the streets. I mean, it's just completely different.
And also Senior Bar, which was a favorite too. Like they basically obliterated Senior Bar too. So
yeah,
the building's still there, but it's not what it used to be.
Well, hey, your book, Notre Dame versus the Klan, How the Fighting Irish Defied the KKK. I mean, it's just amazing. I mean, it's in depth. And anytime I interview an author of a book, obviously I explain to our listeners that you have to go read the book, because there's no way we can truly touch the essence of it just in a 45-minute, interview. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I do kind of want to just meet and just first encourage folks to go get the book, to read the book, but second, just to kind of talk about it a little bit. Man, the amount of historical and research that you provided on the University of Notre Dame, but also the Ku Klux Klan, specifically in Indiana, I mean, it's great. Mm-hmm. And I obviously disagree with everything about the Klan, but it's our history. And so anyway, I just want to talk about that and just first ask you what sparked you to dive in and write it?
Well, I'd heard as a student, I was a history major, so I
Okay.
might have been slightly more kind of on that wavelength already.
Uh-huh.
And as an Indiana, lifelong Indiana guy, as you know, not everybody at Notre Dame is from Indiana.
Correct.
And so I might have been kind of in tune, and I had heard some of the folklore, but I remember, when I heard about some kind of altercation between the Klan and Notre Dame, like I was a little confused. I was like, what was the Klan doing here? This isn't the Deep South. What do they care about Notre Dame? And so I'm not exactly sure why I picked it up again, but I was kind of making the transition from writing magazine articles to writing books.
Okay.
And I remember the story, and I started looking into it. And, when I started to learn about kind of the supervillain in this story, the Grand Dragon, D.C. Stevenson, that's when I knew it was a really good story, because he's such a diabolical kind of character that I knew that it was going to be, that you could build a book around this story.
Right. Okay.
And then I didn't know this at the time, but what I found out too was that the riot was 100 years ago. This year it was in 1924, and what a pivotal year that was for both institutions. Like the riot was in May of 1924.
Okay.
That was 1924 was the season of the Four Horsemen.
Right.
That's the year Notre Dame went to its first ever bowl game, won its first ever national championship. And it's also the year that the Klan in Indiana collapsed. Like it all happened, in a 12-month span. So I didn't know that when I started writing, but it was a very compressed timeline of events. And it was a very, very eventful year.
Yeah, and you wouldn't have even discovered that until you dove in and started researching this. And
start
one thing
looking
led
at
to another.
timelines. Yeah.
Hey, man, and you when did you originally write it?
It was published in 2004 originally by Loyola Press. That the paperback you have there is Notre Dame Press. Was a few years ago.
Okay.
So it's still in print and paperback from Notre Dame Press, but it originally came out in 2004. But I've been working on it for about 4 years before that. So
I got you.
Long time ago.
Man, all the newspaper articles at the time. How'd you obtain that information? Was newspapers.com wasn't quite there yet.
It was a lot of time in the Notre Dame archives, a lot of time in the Indiana State archives, a lot of time in the state archives, the Indiana Center for History, the South Bend Tribune archives, microfiche machines.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Man, because as soon as I got newspapers.com a few years ago, it is a game changer. And keyword search and all that stuff. And
it's nothing like putting your hands on the, like in the Notre Dame archives, Father Walsh, who's another fascinating guy. He was president of Notre Dame at the time. He was a history professor. That's what his PhD was in, was history. And he, I'm sure we'll get into this, but all the kind of hate mail he got after the riot and all that, he kind of meticulously filed that all away, and it's in the Notre Dame archives, and you can see kind of his handwritten notes on it. And I think it's something you wouldn't, unless you're actually laying your hands on the documents, it's just kind of a different vibe.
Absolutely.
And I was also able, because this was more than 20 years ago, I was able to talk to people that had actually been there.
Amazing.
There were a couple of guys that were freshmen at the time. They were pushing 100 by the time I talked to them. So I was able to talk to eyewitnesses too.
That's just so neat, man. So neat. Again, you provided great, not only does it talk about this clash in 1924, man, you provided great research and background leading up to that. And so first, let's talk about Father Sorin, just in your opinion, just his vision in establishing a Catholic university in the wilderness, basically.
Yeah, I mean, he was a really interesting guy. I really don't think they make him like that anymore. He was a French priest from a French order. He came here to the southern part of Indiana around Vincennes, and his journey to northern Indiana, he was almost kind of banished. He was such a problem for his superiors that they gave him this land that the Catholic Church had acquired via Father Baden, another well-known name around these parts, and basically told him they could have this land, but he had to found a seminary and a college. And the general opinion of that is they gave that to him thinking it was impossible, and that they would never have to deal with him again once they gave him this job. So him and I think 12 members of the religious order, the Holy Cross Order, all of them French, made the journey from southern Indiana to northern Indiana, and the rest is history.
Wild. I was just on campus the other day and took a picture of they have a plaque of his letter out there and overlooking the lakes and everything. And, it's just amazing. And then I read also, Alexis Coquiller, one of South Bend's founding father, kind of befriended him, and he stayed with him.
Yeah, he was one of the first students, right?
That's just wild. We stop here for a quick word from one of our sponsors. You've heard me talk about In Rugco Studio and Gift Shop multiple times on the podcast and on social media. I am very proud to partner with them, and I encourage you all to stop by and check out all that they have to offer. In Rugco Studio and Gift Shop is located in a cool, old, historic Mishawaka storefront located at 220 East Mishawaka Avenue, right across from the entrance to Central Park. At this family-owned gift shop, you'll find Mishawaka and South Bend-inspired teas, coffee mugs, stickers, and magnets that you just will not find anywhere else. But this is more than just a hometown pride store. You'll also find national brands like Lodge Cast Iron, Minnetonka, Darn Tough Socks, and Smart Wool. There are gourmet food options, outdoor clothing and footwear for men and women, and seasonal decor. There's even a small batch bakery located inside, Lola's Pastry, Bread, and Jam Bakery. This is a true Mishawaka destination. To truly get a sense of all that In Rugco Studio and Gift Shop has to offer, you just have to visit their store. Again, at 220 East Mishawaka Avenue, across from the Central Park entrance. Once you're there, you'll understand why I'm describing the place so enthusiastically and why I'm so excited that we are partnering, as they are a locally owned small family business who is entrenched in our community and dedicated to seeing it thrive. Our website, indianarugco.com, to check out all that they have to offer. The link is in the show notes. And now, back to the episode. Again, your book does provide context, from a United States perspective on the Ku Klux Klan, but specifically in Indiana. Mm-hmm. You mentioned D.C. Stevenson, just how he was kind of the driving force behind the growth. Man, talk to me just about D.C. Stevenson, the type of guy he was, and just how he grew the Klan.
Well, his title was, he was Grand Dragon of the Indiana Klan, but he was kind of a consummate salesman, and he there's no question he was ideologically, racist and bigoted, but his primary motivation seemed to be getting rich and powerful.
Cash, money, and power.
Yep. Political power. And he kind of succeeded beyond all expectations. He was making, money hand over fist, selling these Klan memberships. He had the largest circulation paper, and then he had politicians that were in the Klan at every level of Indiana government, including eventually Ed Jackson, the governor, who was elected in 1924. Right. The year we're talking about.
That's just wild, man. That is wild. And you even met with a former psychology professor at Notre Dame. Yeah, kind of presented him. Dr. Smith, was that his name?
Yeah.
You presented him kind of with D.C. Stevenson's traits.
Yeah, and I mean, he's reluctant to diagnose a guy he's never met. But when I went to him specifically, one thing that the thing that kind of specifically interested me was, and we're kind of jumping ahead, but Stevenson survived his prison term and got out,
really,
and seemed to have kind of never caused any problems again. So, and he was in prison for a pretty heinous murder that he committed.
Okay,
and I was curious, like, is this normal that a guy could kind of reform himself like that? And that's the question I wanted to ask Dr. Smith was, like, is that unheard of, that a guy who's kind of a bona fide violent psychopath could kind of end up being a relatively peaceful old man? So that was the question I wanted to ask him.
Right. That's just wild. And he sociopath. I mean,
yeah.
What are some different ways that the Indiana Klan in the early 20s went about recruiting and spreading their kind of quote unquote mission?
Yeah, their primary recruiting vehicle were these kind of all-day rallies. They'd have these
Okay.
massive, and they were kind of a combination or something between a county fair and a political rally.
Okay.
And they would have, all day food and marching bands and speeches. And that was kind of the primary recruiting vehicle. And it had been very successful.
Uh-huh.
And they were kind of marching northward across the state from Indianapolis to Kokomo. And then it was kind of inevitable that they would end up having one of these rallies in, one of the state's largest cities, South Bend.
Right. And you mentioned earlier also about the elected officials in Indiana were Klansmen or at least backed by the Klan. I mean, that was a lot deeper than we think. Huh?
Oh, it was pervasive. I mean, it was the entire Indianapolis City Council, the governor. I mean, yeah.
Jackson, you said.
Yeah. It was the Klan was the biggest political force in the state by far.
Man, and they went to extremes to get the folks elected, door to door, dropping like pamphlets or whatnot.
Yeah, they were very organized. They had a ton of money. So yeah, they were. It was. One of the questions I get asked all the time is like, why have I never heard of this, especially in Indiana? And I think one of the reasons, like, it didn't last that long. Like from Stevenson setting foot in Indiana to Stevenson going into his prison cell it was less than 5 years. So
that's hardly even a term.
Yeah, so the whole thing was but what he was able to pull off in 5 years is pretty incredible.
Absolutely, and even in the book, when folks read it details his trajectory, straight forward, because he's driven by one thing, like we said, and money and power, and just kept going. We talk a little bit about Notre Dame by the 1920s, and you'd mentioned it too, like by 1924. Man, what was Notre Dame's status as a university by then? It was a lot bigger than a wilderness school.
it was no longer a wilderness. It was growing rapidly. In many ways, it was kind of outgrowing itself. It was outgrowing the campus. It was still all male, of course. It would be for another good 50 years.
Yeah.
But it, the growing fame of the football team was making Notre Dame a national institution under Newt Rockne. And it also, it's an interesting point to me that the growth of the Klan and the growth of Notre Dame were in some ways they were being propelled by the same demographics. The Klan represented this kind of Protestant panic at these immigrants, these largely Catholic immigrant groups that were coming into the country, whereas Notre Dame represented the other side of that coin. The aspirations of this Catholic immigrant cohort that was growing into the middle class and wanting to send its sons to college.
Right. Yeah. You also wrote, and I'm South Bend. I love South Bend, Mishawaka, local history. I'm so interested in how neighborhood patterns change and how those types of things change. And at that time, you wrote that most kids lived off campus.
Yeah, they had outgrown the few dormitories they had. So it's interesting. Like when you read about this, a lot of people refer to this kind of general order that Father Walsh issued, ordering all the students to remain on campus. Well, the majority of them didn't even live on campus.
Right.
They lived in town. They had no choice but be out there in it. And one of the big consequences of the riot was this massive building program. It was the middle of the Depression.
Right.
And they basically brought every student on campus, kind of drew a line around campus, and it began generations of separation between the students of Notre Dame and the community of South Bend that I think we're just now really seeing like that starting to break down.
Right.
Certainly when I was at Notre Dame, that was still in effect. There was essentially kind of a DMZ between the city of South Bend and the students of Notre Dame. Very few lived off campus. You were an anomaly if you lived off campus. You were kind of the expectation was that you would live on campus for 4 years. And that's what I did.
Freshmen. I mean, now I think they make
through juniors have
so.
to. Yeah.
Wow. That's wild.
They didn't make us, but everybody did.
Right. And there is also something, that's not a bad thing. I mean, there's something to be said about the friendship and the kinship that you form.
Yeah, for sure. But I think that, an institution like Notre Dame should have ties to the community that it's inside of too. And I think that didn't exist for a long time. And I think a lot of that did result from the Klan riot and this distrust that came up between the Notre Dame leadership and they distrusted the civic authorities of South Bend and Indiana with good reason, really.
Right.
But it took a long time for those barriers to fall.
Just amazing how one thing leads to another. And around the same time, though, as the Indiana Klan was increasing its power in Indiana, there was a gentleman by the name of Patrick O'Donnell who founded the American Unity League and an anti-Klan newsletter. Talk about just the impact that O'Donnell had on.
Yeah, I mean, there were, as the Klan grew in power and visibility, there were reactions to it. People saw it for what it was, but it was large. If you're being 100% kind of honest about it, it was relatively ineffective. I mean, the only thing that brought the Klan down was D.C. Stevenson's conviction for murder.
Yeah,
that there was some resistance, there was some protests, and obviously the Klan riot. But I think when D.C. Stevenson said that the public was with him up to that point, it largely was.
Wow. That's wild, man. That's amazing. Yeah, and you had written just some of the kids hadn't heard the confrontational tone that O'Donnell kind of had towards the Klansmen at that time, and so he was warning people. I mean, he was saying they're going to take over. They're going to take over your politics, take over your schools, and it kind of peaks. Well,
the Klan like really presented itself as a pretty benign, patriotic organization. They presented themselves as defenders of prohibition. That was a big part of their platform.
Right.
They're defenders of Protestant virtue. So, they could present themselves that way and kind of hide from the darker parts of their platform.
Man, and this O'Donnell was kind of bringing it to light. All this led to quite the clash in South Bend, Indiana that involved some Notre Dame students, some members of the KKK, as well as local police. But first, talk to us about why D.C. Stevenson and the Klan even chose South Bend to have a huge rally in a parade in May of 1924.
Yeah, it's a good question. So on the one hand, these big all day rallies were the kind of the tent post of all the Klan's recruiting efforts in Indiana. They'd had them in other cities, notably Kokomo was a kind of a legendary rally the year before. So to have one of these in South Bend, which I think was Indiana's third biggest city at the time, was it made a kind of sense. On the other hand, these were some of Indiana's most Catholic counties, so it looked like a provocation. And there's a school of thought for sure that in the lead up to the 1924 governor's election in November of 24, that Stevenson wanted to provoke a reaction, knowing that the public would be with him, and that it would help get Ed Jackson, his candidate, elected. So there's a school, and the way after the riot, the way Stevenson reacted in the newspapers that he controlled, it kind of bore that out. It was the official response was kind of, look, these Catholic Irish students are out of control. Yeah. They're bad for society. Yep. And if that was his aim, you look at the results, Ed Jackson won. So it's hard to argue.
Right.
But it definitely, it was definitely a provocation, and there's no way somebody as savvy as D.C. Stevenson didn't recognize that.
And it would gain them more publicity.
I think that the individual Klansmen on the street were very surprised to be attacked and have their robes stolen and be harassed. Like, I don't think they saw that coming. These other rallies across the state had been, like I said, they look like 4th of July picnics. So I think that when you read the accounts of those guys, then they're surprised. Like, I think that was genuine. I don't think D.C. Stevenson was surprised that there was a riot.
I got you. Yep. And kind of controversy sells type situation, like even now.
It proved some points that he wanted to make about, that these Irish Catholic children of immigrants were not good citizens.
Folks, I am proud that one of my all-time favorite restaurants, Allie's Cafe and Catering, is a sponsor on this episode. We did an episode with Betty a while back, who owns Allie's along with her husband, Chuck. And as you heard in that episode, Alley's is about as locally owned and family operated as you can get. I'm proud to be spreading the good word about Alley's Cafe, as I have been a customer there for over 20 years. Our sons are 16 and 23, and both of them have been going to Alley's with us for as long as they can remember. And speaking of family, that is the feeling that you get as soon as you step in and interact with the staff and other guests. Waitresses there treat you like family, and that is why they have literally served generations of customers. Those who were once children eating their Mickey Mouse pancakes at Alley's over 20 years ago are now parents themselves and are bringing their own children to Alley's. To me, that is a true testament to the success of a local establishment. But being nice is great and all, but let me tell you about their food. Their menu is quite diverse, from breakfast items, including my absolute favorite, the breakfast burrito, and my wife's favorite, biscuits and gravy, to hamburgers, to sandwiches, to wraps and salads, to name a few. But they don't stop there. Since 1997, they've built quite the catering service also. Over those years, they've served countless events, weddings, funerals, parties, and so forth. And to me, simply saying, since 1997, tells me they're doing something right. They're located at 2323 Mishawaka Avenue, about a block east of Ironwood. And to check out all that they have to offer, simply head to their website at alleyscafe.com. Folks, I can't encourage you enough to stop by Alley's and grab a meal. And if you see me in there stuffing my face with a giant breakfast burrito, don't laugh. Just let me enjoy the tasty goodness. Thank you again, Alley's, for sponsoring this episode. Man, and you mentioned some of the Klansmen was surprised at what they faced here. I mean, as soon as they got off the bus stop, or I'm sorry, like the train station, the train platform, they didn't feel as welcome here in South Bend. Talk to me about a few. I mean,
that was day one.
Yeah, what happened on day one?
On day one of the riot, which was May 17th, 1924, they were greeted by Notre Dame students and were completely caught off guard. And the students, were throwing them off train platforms, stealing the robes, but kind of the favorite move of the day to steal a set of these robes. Okay. Kind of as a trophy. And, there's a picture in the book of a Notre Dame sophomore posing in the robes he stole after that first day. And like, small world that it is, like I was at Notre Dame with that guy's grandson, Mark Fooey. So it was, that day one was day one went to the students in Notre Dame because the Klansmen were so caught off guard.
Yep. And but like you had mentioned, some of the Klansmen were asking them for like directions to here and there, and they gave them directions to a back alley. And
it all culminated with Notre Dame students surrounding the South Bend Klan headquarters and basically taking out every window in the building. They had a quote unquote fiery cross with light bulbs in the second floor window, and the first floor was a grocery. So the students were just taking potatoes out of barrels and
whipping them, chucking them,
whipping them up there until they put out every light. And in the aftermath, like if you were part of the leadership of the American Catholic Church in 1924, this image of a potato throwing Irish mob was like
not what they wanted.
Worst case scenario.
Absolutely. And the youth.
Yeah, right. Out of control.
Yes.
Violent.
Speaking of where the Klan headquarters was, that was on Michigan Street and Wayne Street downtown. To our listeners, CJ's Pub is currently there.
It's right next to it where the building was. Yeah.
Right there in that area. And that all went down. I mean, just right there.
Yeah. The riot went on all day. And by and large, it was, like I said, it was kind of Notre Dame's day. And the few students in Notre Dame who didn't participate, who like followed the order from Father Walsh, probably regretted it, which
felt left out.
Yeah, which set things up for
the
next day of riots, which didn't go nearly as well.
No, it didn't. And I mean, after that first day, then the mayor catch heat for the police chief and the mayor caught heat for letting these kids run rampant. And
nobody was prepared.
Yeah.
And largely it was thought, this is generalized, but in large part, it was thought that the St. Joseph County Sheriff's Department was largely pro-Klan,
Okay.
whereas the South Bend City Police was seen as largely kind of pro-Irish,
Yeah.
pro-Notre Dame, and so there was, and in the news accounts that made national news, and the news accounts that followed it were almost universally, was against Notre Dame. It was a public relations disaster for Notre Dame.
My gosh. And that was just after the first day when we kind of mentioned Notre Dame. I don't say won, but they kind of...
They did. They won.
Hand.
Yeah, they won. They won day one. They won day one. Yeah.
And so the other kiddos were kind of jealous they weren't there. And then, Father Matthew Walsh was obviously concerned at the behavior. But the second day, it got a little bit more violent.
So that was a Friday, and on Saturday, nothing happened. And then on the Sunday, at this point, a lot of those Klansmen on day one were out of towners, like you mentioned, the train platforms.
Yeah.
They were coming in for like this rally. They were gone.
Okay.
So what was left on Sunday was kind of this hard kernel of the local Klan support, and they organized and kind of planned their revenge. So they gathered downtown again, and then they called on campus and said, basically, they created a cover story where they said they had a Notre Dame student, and then, like I said, well, these Notre Dame students who'd largely had the time of their lives on Friday. They were just looking for a reason to continue the fun.
Yeah.
So they went into town, and this time the Klan was ready. They were waiting for him, and the sheriff's department had deputized a bunch of Klansmen. And this time, this time the Notre Dame students took a huge beating. And the potential for real
injury, right?
Yeah, I mean, no one was killed. There were broken bones. There was a guy was arrested with a cannon at one point. There were gunshots, but no one was killed. But it was a bad scene, and the potential for real carnage was huge all day.
That was close.
Yeah,
it was close.
Yeah,
and then you mentioned some of the students kind of retreated or kind of ran away to the courthouse.
Yeah, I think they retreated in disarray, and they were on the courthouse lawn, and that's when Father Walsh kind of came up. And Father Walsh had been really trying his best to kind of ignore this situation away.
Not feed into it.
Yeah, he was forced to go out there in person and gave this really dramatic speech on the courthouse lawn and rallied students in Notre Dame, and they went back to campus, and that was the end of the riot. But the fallout was just starting.
Man, could you imagine a university president driving to the scene of a riot? I mean, it's just amazing. Pre-television, all of that stuff.
I think it's even more amazing, like in that era, to have like mass disobedience to an authority figure like that. Walsh had really laid down the law, and he was just completely ignored. And I think it's also very telling that in the aftermath, Walsh never punished a single student for being in the riot. So
that's true. Yeah. That's true. Kind of his way to just let it just simmer out, man. That's wild. You mentioned public backlash. I mean, the mayor, Eli Siebert, had a bunch of different meetings, and there was bad publicity across the country.
Yeah. I mean, there were newspaper articles, and they were all kind of a piece where they were like, these students are out of control, or, running off peaceful citizens. And that wasn't just the Klan. The Klan owned a number of newspapers, which obviously this was front page news, but that was in all the, the quote unquote mainstream press too. And there was not... no one was willing to kind of defend the actions of Notre Dame in this. So it was just an unmitigated disaster, which when I said how one of the main questions I get is, how come I've never heard of this? Well, one of the reasons is like neither side really wanted to memorialize this. Like,
there's no plaque.
Yeah, Notre Dame didn't want to glorify any aspect of this.
Yeah, there's no plaque on Colfax or on Michigan and Wayne
or on campus
or on campus.
Yeah.
It's just God. When I first read this, I was just my jaw was dropping.
Had you ever heard of that growing up here? Had you heard of it?
No. I'm telling you, I never heard of it until I saw the book, and I didn't get this until, like you said, 2018 or whenever it came out in the Notre Dame press. And I've loved our local history. I mean, most of my life, but I've never dug deep until recently. But no, I mean, this is, and furthermore, I'm on all the local Facebook history pages and all that, South Bend, Mishawaka Facebook pages. And anytime that this is brought up, there are always comments. What? I had no clue.
Yeah.
No clue. So I'm glad I get to at least share it in this manner as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. Soon after the clash, Father Walsh gathered all the entire student body in Washington Hall, which is still standing right next to the main building.
Right.
It's one of the oldest, buildings there.
Right.
He was kind of smart though. He wanted to convince the kids not to mess with the Klan headquarters again. And who'd he ask to speak to the kids?
He had New Rockney come in and speak to him, and it worked in the short term. The crisis was averted, but another, like we've already alluded to, but a big part of the aftermath with this was that Ed Jackson, the Klan's candidate, he won the governor's race. So the riot was in May. In November, Ed Jackson won.
Right then.
Yeah.
But Father Walsh knew, that he
that's when he started that building program to get everybody on campus, because he had completely lost faith in the civil authorities to protect Notre Dame students.
Man, it's just so wild. It's just nuts to me. I guess, college campuses across the area, especially in the 60s and 70s, got used to like civil unrest and stuff like that. But I just couldn't imagine all this now within day of social media and Facebook and camera phones everywhere. And it'd be different,
Yeah. I mean, they were still taking pictures of themselves. Like there's some of those.
That's
in the
true,
book.
though. That's true.
A few. Yeah. And there was media, not social media, but there was plenty of media about
That's
it.
true.
And mostly Notre Dame was just trying to escape this story, when it happened.
And then it's neat that you had mentioned earlier about Father Walsh, how you've touched laid his hands on all the notes.
He got a lot of hate mail. There's a lot of crazy kind of anti-Catholic hate mail. And he, like the historian that he was, he carefully filed it all away. It's all up there in the archives. So,
man, that's neat. And just in order for you to go research, did you have to know somebody, or you just
No, it's funny you ask that, because like I'm alumni, I'm a Notre Dame graduate, but at this point I had no qualifications. I had not written any books. I'd written some magazine articles, but I literally just went up there to, I think it's on the sixth floor of the library. I think that's where the archives were, and it's behind kind of like a vault. Door, and I knocked, and they could not have been more gracious to me.
That's awesome.
They're the ones that told me, like, the picture of the guy in the Klan rooms, they knew his name, and so they really, like, for a guy that was not working on a serious piece of scholarship or a PhD dissertation, like, they just could not have been more gracious to me. I'll always be grateful to them for that. And my next book too, it's totally unrelated, but same. I'm always amazed, like how people have been willing to help me, like, tell their stories, even in the face of not great credentials on my part.
Yeah.
I
mean, literally, I'm only 40 episodes into this, but this is the same exact thing. When I reached out to the first 3 or 4 people to come on, I mean, I literally had to just not sell them, but kind of sell them on, this is what I'm envisioning. I mean, my second guest was Mayor Roger Parent, the former mayor of South Bend. I just never met him in my life, reached out to him. And since then we've kind of formed a good relationship, but same thing. One thing.
I mean, my second book was about a medical experiment in Minnesota that we did during World War II. And the scientist who did it was Ansel Keys, and he was still alive. He was living in a nursing home in Minneapolis. And when I first started with that book, I thought there was a chance he might be my bad guy, that he might be my villain.
Yeah.
And he had an unusual name, Ansel Keys. So I literally just picked up a Minneapolis phone book, call him up. And he was like, yeah, come on by. And this guy was an academic. He'd spent his whole life in academia. And I'd written the Klan book then, but it wasn't out yet. So again, I didn't have any real kind of obvious credentials.
Yeah.
And when I went to his little apartment in this nursing home, he had all his personal papers laid out. He was like, take whatever you want. Take whatever you want. Use whatever you want. Yeah. And, so like at every step of the way, I've been amazed kind of how helpful people have been.
Hey, how, just kind of a few reflective questions here, man. How has just writing this book in particular impacted your life?
Well, like I said, I've written other books, but nothing, this was my first book, and nothing touches it. I mean, I talk about it probably once a month. The book's 20 years. The book came out 20 years ago. And this is the 100th anniversary year, so it's a little different, but every so often it's a story that people just can't get enough of. And I think in the cover copy of it, I said, I had something about two uniquely American institutions, and that's what it is. It's two American institutions that people are interested in, the Klan and Notre Dame. And there was this moment in history, these 3 days in history, where they collided. Yep. And the characters, I mean, we talked a lot about D.C. Stevenson, but Father Walsh was a war hero and a scholar and a really interesting cat. And so the story really just tells itself.
No, it truly does, man. It definitely does.
So it's been great. I mean, I've been with this story now for 20 years, and I love that people still want to talk about it. I had an event in South Bend not too long ago, and when the book came out 20 years ago, I gave a presentation at the Center for History, and the Klan showed up at that. Yeah, and I gave a presentation a few months ago, and there were people there that had been at that too. Really? So when I told that story about the Klan showing up, there were people that had been there with me that night. So it's been part of my life for 20 years now, and I just I never get tired of talking about it. I guess it's like when a classic rock band plays their hits, like I still like talking about it. Yeah. And I've learned a lot. Like people have shared stories with me, things that I wish I'd known when I wrote the book. So especially in Indiana, like a lot of people have a personal story. I remember I was giving a talk once, and this old guy came up to me, and he said that when he was a kid, his mom made him and his little brother sailor suits out of their dad's Klan robes. She cut up his Klan robes and made him sailor suits for his Halloween. So that's a story I wish I would have known when I wrote the book.
Well, that's kind of how pervasive it was.
Man,
that's wild. Well, hey, I truly appreciate your time. I truly do. Appreciate you driving here from Valparaiso, man. Thank you. And I'll be sure to get website.
Yeah, it's in the book. It's in the book.
Perfect. I'll be sure to share all that.
All right.
It'd be in my show notes.
Great.
Sharing social media and all that good stuff.
Sounds good.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for listening to another episode of Round the Bend Now and Then. I truly appreciate you all spending your valuable time listening. And extra thanks to Todd Tucker for taking your time to meet and share the story behind your book. Again, folks, a 45-minute interview only scratches the surface of how good the book Notre Dame versus the Klan is. So use the links in the show notes to purchase it and other Todd Tucker books as well. Join us again next time as we learn more about South Bend and Mishawaka's Now and Then.